Same river, same night, same bait. One man pulls 4 or 5 catfish. The man fishing a quarter mile away pulls 50. The equipment is identical. The river is the same. The difference is not luck, and it is not a secret bait recipe. It is a single habit that commercial trotline fishermen in the early 20th century developed through necessity and that hobby anglers, then and now, have almost never adopted. They moved the line, not once at the start of the season, regularly, deliberately, in response to where the catfish actually were in the water column that week, not where they had been the week before, not where the angler assumed they should be based on last summer's spot. The commercial operators who ran trot lines on major river systems across the American South and Midwest in the 1910s and 1920s were not working with better equipment or a superior bait formula. They were working with a different understanding of what catfish do between April and October. And that understanding, built from seasons of recorded observation, made the difference between 4 fish and 50. Channel catfish and blue catfish are not stationary bottom dwellers, in the way most anglers picture them. They are temperature-sensitive, oxygen-dependent fish that shift position in the water column across the season with a regularity that is predictable if you have records to read. In early spring, as water temperatures climb from winter lows, catfish move into shallower, warmer sections of a river or reservoir. They are feeding actively, metabolism accelerating with the warming water. By early summer, as surface temperatures push past the range where catfish metabolize efficiently, they begin dropping to cooler mid-depth water. By midsummer on deep river systems, they are holding at depths 20 or 30 feet below their April position. And within each seasonal position, they still respond day to day to current changes, oxygen levels, and the movement of baitfish they are tracking. The catfish did not leave the river. The catfish left the depth. And a trot line set at the April depth is fishing empty water by July. Commercial trot line operators understood this not because they had scientific research on catfish biology, most of that came decades later, but because they kept records, run counts by date, catch numbers by line, depth of each set noted alongside the result. Over a season, across multiple seasons, a pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. The lines set at 20 feet in April produced well. By June, those same lines were producing half as much. The lines a neighboring operator had dropped to 28 feet were outproducing everything else on the water. By August, the productive depth had shifted again. The operators who tracked this and moved their lines accordingly pulled consistent numbers through the whole season. The ones who set their lines once and left them watched catch rates fall and blamed the river, the heat, the moon. The river was not the problem. The record book, or the absence of one, was. The practical method experienced commercial operators used to track the productive depth required no sophisticated equipment. On a river, the first indicator was catch distribution across the line itself. A trot line, set across a depth gradient, running from shallow to deep, told the 4 fishermen exactly where fish concentrated that week. If the deepest hooks were producing and the shallow hooks were clean, the catfish had dropped. If the shallow hooks were loading and the deep hooks were empty, the fish had moved up in the column. This reading required running the line attentively, noting which hooks carried fish and which did not, and recording that information rather than simply rebaiting and resetting without observation. The second indicator was water temperature at depth, estimated by experienced hands reading the feel of water brought up on end, the main line, during retrieval. Before thermometers were standard trot line equipment on most working boats, the water itself was the instrument. The timing of the depth shift follows a biological sequence that runs on the same schedule on similar bodies of water year after year. And this is where multi-season records became genuinely valuable. In the river systems of the Mid-South and lower Midwest, catfish began their mid-depth retreat in late May to early June when water temperatures crossed the low 70s. By the 4th of July on most years, the productive trotline depth had dropped 8 to 15 feet compared to its May position. By late August, on a deep river with adequate cold, bottom water, fish were holding at maximum summer depth. Then, as temperatures began their autumn decline in September, the reverse migration began, fish moving upward again into warmer mid-depths, then into shallower feeding zones as October approached. An angler who understood this seasonal arc and kept records to calibrate it against their specific water was not guessing. They were reading a pattern that repeated with reliable consistency. Here is where the hobby angler's approach breaks down, and understanding why is more useful than simply knowing the rule. Most hobby catfishermen return to productive spots. A location that gave up 10 fish in May becomes the anchor of a summer routine. The angler drives to the same bank, sets at the same position, drops to the same depth. In May, this works. In July, it produces a fraction of the previous result. The conclusion is almost always one of three things. The fish moved out, the summer heat slowed the bite, or the bait needs changing. All three redirect attention away from the actual variable, the depth of the line, relative to where catfish are holding right now. The spot may still hold catfish. The bank may still be the right bank. The problem is that the line is fishing 10 feet above where the fish are suspended in the water column in July. Change the depth, not the location. The fish are still there. The line simply is not. The discipline of moving the line requires overcoming a deeply rooted angling habit. The assumption that a productive spot is productive at all depths in all seasons. Old commercial trotline operators on the White River, the Ouachita, and the larger Tennessee Valley impoundments broke that assumption early because their livelihood depended on consistency. A hobby angler could absorb a slow July and blame the season. A commercial operator running lines to sell catch could not afford that explanation. The pressure to produce forced a precision in observation that the hobby context rarely demands. That precision produced a simple but powerful rule. Before changing location, change depth. Before blaming the river, check the records. Before assuming the fish are gone, ask whether the line is where the fish actually are this week. The rule required no expensive equipment. It required a notebook, a consistent running schedule, and the willingness to move hardware already in the water. The records that distinguished consistently productive commercial operations were not elaborate. A date, the depth of each line section, fish per hook across the set, weather noted briefly, water temperature estimated or measured, accumulated across a season. This information produced a depth calendar, a rough projection of where catfish held on, a given river system in a given month under average conditions. Operators who had fished the same water for 5 or 10 seasons carried this calendar in their heads, refined by experience into something close to a reliable prediction. They knew that on their particular stretch of river, in a normal summer, fish would be at a certain depth by the first week of June, deeper by mid-July, and rising again by the first cool nights of September. This was not mystical river knowledge. It was pattern recognition built from repetitive recorded observation, the same discipline that produced consistent results in every occupation that depended on reading biological cycles accurately across seasons. The second element of the commercial method that hobby anglers consistently missed was the frequency of adjustment. Moving a trot line is physical work. Pulling anchors, resetting drops, repositioning across a current seam. It takes time and effort, especially on a hot July river. The natural inclination is to set the line and leave it until conditions force a change. Commercial operators overcame this through economic necessity. A line producing 3 fish per run when it should produce 15 was a problem requiring a solution, not patience. The adjustment cycle on productive operations was typically weekly during stable conditions and more frequent during transition periods. Late May during the spring. Warm-up, September during the autumn cool-down. These transition windows, when catfish were actively moving through the water column in response to changing temperatures, were also when a line left at last week's depth fell off fastest. The operators who moved during transitions caught the shift. The ones who waited caught the decline. What this method asks of a modern angler is less than it appears. A simple depth log, productive hook positions noted each run, with date and rough water temperature, produces usable pattern data within a single season. By the second season on the same water, the log becomes predictive. The question shifts from where did I fish last time to where should the fish be this week. That shift changes the entire decision before the line enters the water. It is the same shift that separated commercial trotline operators of the 1920s from hobby anglers fishing the same river on the same nights. Not better equipment, not a secret location. A different question asked before the line was set, and willingness to move the line when the answer changed. Catfish follow a biological schedule the water sets. A record book kept honestly across one season will begin to reveal it. Subscribe to Traditional Angling for more historically grounded fishing knowledge. The methods that worked before fish finders, explained by the biology that made them work.